So I'm Nina and this is Alicia. We started running this course now 3 years ago. And I'm otherwise in my final year of Ph.D. in German philosophy. And now we will just say a little bit about what we intended Paper Zero to be and how it came about. So the idea of the Paper Zero is to introduce students of economics and also of other disciplines to a range of issues that are generally being left out of the economic curricula. And at the same time, it's also intent to kind of develop the capacities of so-called critical thinking, which we felt are also generally neglected from the university education nowadays. And it is kind of an independent course, so it is not tied to any kind of department or faculty. And yeah, it's organized and taught by PhD students of different disciplines, both of humanities and social sciences. And how initially Paper Zero emerged was part of this movement, which you might have heard of so-called economic pluralism. And this movement kind of took on in England in kind of late 2013, 2014. And in Cambridge in particular, kind of the initiator of this was a society called CSEP, or Cambridge Society for Economic Pluralism. So CSEP, as you might be aware, is kind of it kind of still exists and is very active and organizes many lectures by both policymakers and academics. And it was founded in 2011 by a few students doing the graduate diploma. Including me, who kind of had this issue with economics already then, that there is something fundamentally wrong with how economics is taught, and nobody really talks about that in the class. But back then, kind of, we really were a majority of 4 or 5 students in one class, and that was kind of our own opinion, and we thought we just have to face more of our classmates with this issue. And then the only existing society was the Marshall Society, and they seemed to be much more interesting in kind of the networking kind of aspects of what societies do. So we thought, okay, we will set up this society and invite heterodox economists to tell us something about what our lecturers don't tell us. So then kind of while CSEP was already kind of actively running those lectures, then we were also being connected with other societies across the country, and then kind of meanwhile this movement of economics pluralism spread both within the country and internationally. Then, so in late 2013, early 2014, then a couple of initiatives were set up. One was led by the Institute for New Economic Thinking. They have funded the core program, which is kind of a separate course designed to fill the gaps of the majority of the curricula in the UK university. And I think it was already then in the next academic year, so 2014, 2015, kind of introduced at UCL. And I think, I'm not sure that is running in one or the other forum there. Then kind of Manchester University was a big player or has been and still is in the movement. Their society was Post-Crash, sorry. And they've demanded some kind of fundamental changes to their curricula, and some have also been implemented. And kind of at the international level, there was a kind of a collaborative society founded called ISIPE, the International Student Initiative for Pluralism in Economics, which is still an active collaboration of 42 networks of economics students from 19 countries around the world. And then, so in early 2014, this society launched kind of an open letter, which got many, many signatures from academics. And that was also around the time where we felt now we have to do something more than just what CSEP has been doing then, which is running those lectures, hosting other academics. And we kind of had two ideas. One was to start actively doing something that we ourselves introduce students to what we think is wrong with economics. And at the same time, we also felt a need to get like a broader understanding of what the students' opinion on those issues are. Because we were kind of in agreement, but that was kind of one group of us within kind of a much larger body of economics and other students. And then we launched a survey, which Alicia will explain about.
Oh, I will? Oh, I thought you were going to.
Oh, no, I think, yeah. Yeah, Lisa?
Sure.
Okay.
So you're going to...
No, shall I? I mean, I can also
do
this. Yeah, I can put it up.
Yeah, I can put it up.
Okay.
So we thought we kind of know what we think is wrong, as Nina said, but we don't know whether people actually agree with us, whether other students have similar problems or questions or doubts about the way that economics is taught, and we decided to just ask them simply. So we set up a survey.
Which one do you want?
Well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We set up a survey for current undergrad, master's, Ph.D. students, and for alumni, because we also wanted to know how useful their education proved to them after they graduated. And we had a very nice rate of people filling in the survey. It was about 400 and some people that took the survey, 350 I think that completed it, which is almost half of the student body. Well, I mean, it was just over a third of the student body plus the alumni at the faculty. And that was quite surprising because mostly people were not so keen on filling in faculty surveys. But the actual shocking part that we found was that lots of people had the same grievances as we had. And they were probably not as articulate about it as we were because we felt safe in our in-group. But when we asked people why they started studying economics in the first place, over 80% said that they wanted to make the world a better place, and maybe some of you have that feeling as well. And they were harshly disappointed in their education because they found that the education they got was completely unrelated to what's actually going on in the real world and options to make it a better place. And the other main grievance was that there is no inclusion of topics that are relevant nowadays, like financial markets or crises or all kind of other central banks. That it's generally taught in a very abstract way that doesn't relate to what we want to know. I don't know whether we have to get into the numbers, but essentially our conclusion from the results of the survey, you can have a look at it online. The data, everything is online. You can recalculate it. We looked at it many times because we were so surprised about the numbers. The general conclusion was that there are three main grievances, or four. The first one is that we need more real-world applicability in the education. The second one is that we need more interdisciplinarity because you can't just isolatedly teach economics and disconnect it from politics and history and development and all the social sciences. And the third one was that there is an inadequate provision of practical skills. What was the fourth one?
No, there were three.
There was two.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you go to the conclusion? Oh yeah, that we would like to have a more interactive and discursive pedagogical way of teaching stuff. And that was kind of our cue for launching Paper Zero. Because we thought it's great if we wait for the curriculum to change and we will lobby for it, and a large part of our of the society and of our group decided to go for that and speak with the faculty and connect with international movements and everything. But in the meantime, we had to do something, to provide an alternative. And we sat together one afternoon, Nina and another development student, Ivan Brajic, and myself, and we thought, how would we ideally have liked to have our economics courses, our undergrad classes, our introductory classes. And, well, we thought about a couple of principles that we would have liked there to be. And I will talk you quickly through these principles, because these are the principles that we then modeled paper 0 on. And the first one is, as Dina already said, that we want to have some possibility for critical thinking and for discussing and for questioning principles or theories or models. And we feel that that's not sufficiently done in current classes, so we want to provide that. We want to provide a forum for students to be able to ask questions and to criticize. And we very much encourage, and I'm sure that the current coordinators will do that as well, encourage you to question and to ask and to critically think about whatever it is that we tell you. I mean, we just give you a different perspective than other people, but that doesn't mean that our perspective is better or is the real one. And I mean, as Ina said, the main point about this course is to offer some pluralism, multiple views on these issues. So this is a more open way of teaching. It is PhD student led and taught, this course. So all of us talk about topics that we have done a lot of research with very recently. So you have young experts in their field that are very open to criticism. So it's a very convenient way of discussing very current and very often empirical issues. Nina will talk about, what will you talk about next week?
About neoliberalism and how that's that neoclassical economics has not become a dominant school of thought because there is something intrinsically better or more truthful about it, but that is also a result of specific social and political contexts, which is never indicated or talked about when you actually are faced with all those models as a certain representation of truth in your classes.
So it's not about absolute truth. It's about the power relations behind and all these kind of messy things that we're probably not taught so much about in our degree. So that's very interesting. I will talk about the power of the elite the week after and what they do to have the world how it is currently. And other people will talk about all kinds of other interesting aspects of our current world today in empirical terms. We complement that with some theory, with different models, different theory than the one you might be taught in economics degrees, just to give you a broader perspective. And actually it's very important to stress this PhD-led kind of thing, because what we want to encourage is a kind of non-hierarchical space where students and researchers can interact in a more horizontal way, because it's very important both for us as researchers or PhD students and for you guys to not feel that this is some kind of an authority, that we have the absolute truth. So it's this peer-to-peer learning. We learn from you guys, you learn from us, and we can exchange some stuff. In terms of the curriculum, we thought that we would like something that is both up-to-date and can be adjusted to current context. So every year the Paper Zero curriculum changes depending on who teaches it, what kind of sources and knowledge we have that we can share with you. That allows it certain flexibility, and it doesn't mean that we have to read texts from the 60s or 70s that have been proven wrong in the 80s. So it's for undergrads because it's an introductory course, but it's also for masters because it's all kinds of different topics, and all lectures are kind of standalone in themselves, but connected in terms of overall topic. So it makes sense to go to as many as you can or want to, but you don't have to go to every single lecture if you might not be interested in the topic or know a lot about it already. So the aim essentially is to give some kind of an overview of different selection of topics and encourage you to then look more into the topic if you're interested, or ask us or research it yourself. So it's like a basic introduction to all these topics. In practical terms, I'll just tell you quickly how the course developed, because when we started it, it was I think 5 or 6 lectures, no, 7. So it was one term that we could cover with the resources we had. And initially we had thought that we wanted to have professional, lecturers or professors to give the classes, and then we realized it would be very difficult to explain to them that we want them to be, open about, we want them to talk about big lectures of neoclassical economics, we want them to discuss openly, we want them to do a lot of stuff that we thought they might not want to do. So we decided to just cover ourselves the parts that we knew and ask other PhD students to cover the rest. And then we thought that's actually a pretty good way of exchanging knowledge, because PhD students generally know a lot about their field, because that's all they do all day long. So we had this first year, 2000, it was Lent term 2014 was the first time Paper Zero went on air. We also had some reading groups then. The idea was to have an even more horizontal and direct space to interact. We later dropped the reading groups because we realized the commitment was very large if you had to read extra papers and stuff. But if you're interested in getting more background information on the topics, you can always ask us and we provide you with some literature if you want to. We're happy to discuss it with you. So the next day we rolled out the course over the whole year, and it turned out that for some reason people actually turned up and wanted to join, and we're still surprised that you guys come because we know that this is like an extra thing. So we think it's great that you do. And then we included some essay questions so that you can actually research a topic and have somebody that knows about it giving you feedback on that. So that's a great option if you're interested in that. We also introduced a diploma so that you can prove that you attended this course. I don't know what the percentage is that you need to attend to get
50,
it, but
50%.
50%, that's not so much. You can do that. And then finally, we decided after 2 years to hand over the course to a new generation of coordinators and people that have some kind of a fresh approach and look on it, because for us it was still kind of surprising to see it as a thing by itself, and I think you guys have a very different perspective on it, and I think it's great that you're doing this now, so please tell us more about it.
As you say. Okay, cool. Thanks very much for that. And as Alyssa said, again, I should have said before, it's really nice to see so many of you come along, because you really, you're not obligated to do this at all, and you're here out of interest for the things that we hope that we'll be talking about together. So what I'm going to say now, then, I'm just going to speak for like 20 minutes. I'm going to talk about what I call the problem of the hegemony of neoclassical economics, and just explain a bit more about the reason that we're sort of here in the end. So to start from the very beginning, sorry, Nina, could you put the...
Yeah,
so what is neoclassical economics then that we're talking about in this way, and that we've organised our whole lecture series around? So just to begin simply, obviously within economics, as within any field of study and whatever field you may come from yourself, there are different schools of thought, and neoclassical economics is one of a variety. There's, I don't know, my supervisor said there's like 12 different schools of thought, so be it Keynesianism or institutional economics or Marxism, Schumpeterianism, these different schools that offer different insights into how economics works. And this idea of neoclassical economics, so it was said to sort of have been established from around 1890 when Alfred Marshall published The Principle of Economics. The Marshall Library is the name of our economics library over here, incidentally. And then there were some other early practitioners such as Jevons and Walras. And this is sort of said to be the intellectual history of this school of thought. Now, it's quite difficult to define neoclassical economics today because, like with any school of thought, these are quite, compartmentalized terms, and not everyone fits in them so neatly. And it's particularly confusing now because neoclassical economics more recently has become almost like a derogatory term. So people will be like, "Well, you're a neoclassical economist," and they'll be like, "Well, no, I'm not, but they are," whatever. But nevertheless, there are still these general sort of principles or points of view that neoclassical economists tend to take. So, for instance, there's this understanding of the economy as a collection of rational and selfish individuals who are trying to maximize their utility, that is their sort of benefit. And driven by self-interest, all the individuals are, but because of the way that competition works in the market, this ends up with sort of socially beneficial outcomes. Another thing that neoclassical economics tends to do is to focus on consumption, like the purchasing of goods, and exchange, the way that things are traded in a market space. I'm saying this as opposed to being focused, say, on production, which other schools of thought look at, the ideas of technology that's involved in producing goods, or how important this is, like innovation systems are to explaining how economies develop. Another thing that is by no means exclusive to neoclassical economics, but tends to be a large feature of it, is a significant use of complex mathematical modelling, such as in general equilibrium theory. And then more recently, there's this idea of, markets as being self-equilibrating, and therefore there's a sort of assumption that it's best to leave them alone. And this, particularly since the 1960s and 70s, coinciding with the rise of Reaganism in America, or Thatcherism in the UK, and neoliberalism in general, from around this time there's been more of the majority of neoclassical economists, I should say, have tended to adopt more free market approaches that have tended to become more associated, though this isn't always the case. So then what is this hegemony that I referred to then of neoclassical economics? So as I was saying, from the sort of 70s and 80s onwards, this school of thought has become politically dominant in a way that Nina will talk more about next week. And so we saw the likes of Reagan and Thatcher incorporating a lot of these ideas of neoclassical economics into their rhetoric and approach, and also the international organisations like the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, again, tending to be more associated with the school. And it's also led to significant changes in the way that economics has been studied in universities. So you can take, for example, the way that the economics faculty looks here, in terms of what the students are taught these days and which academics get the best position. So now in our economics faculty here, I'd say maybe there are 2 non-neoclassical economists. And that's not always been the case. And historically there have been a lot of other economists from different schools of thought who have been in this department. You've had Joan Robinson and Nicholas Kaldor as famous examples of post-Keynesians here. Also James Trevithick, I guess, in that category. You've had Bob Rowthorne, who is a really great Marxist economist here, and also John Maynard Keynes, of course, himself. And it does seem that there's been this sort of purging of the department of other schools of thought that has gone on over the sort of last 20 or 30 years. So you now see these sort of older economists who used to be in the department who now teach in land economy or geography or these other schools, and basically that's sort of what's happened. And so whereas the department used to, according to people, be a sort of space where you'd have different people from different schools of thought talking on the top floor, in a quite sort of communitarian way, that's no longer actually the case. And this is a phenomenon that's happened in our department, and it's happened in a host of universities across the world. And as I said, it's also reflected in general in the way that international organisations and politics plays out. So that's this hegemony. And then, obviously, our position is that there's a problem with this hegemony, which, you wouldn't necessarily have to agree with. But so our idea is that neoclassical economics has been neglectful. So the neglect of neoclassical economics, I think that's a really good choice of word, neglect, because it's this idea of not giving proper care or attention to something, right? So it's, neoclassical economics has its tools, it has its approach, and it has its focuses. But the idea is that, other schools of thought shine light in different aspects on the same thing, but also look at other aspects of the economy and how our global system works. And so it's just that there doesn't have to be anything that you find inherently wrong with neoclassical economics. It would just have to be an admission that there are other ways to look at things and other things that we need to look at, say production and the way that Schumpeter would maybe look at systems of innovation, and things that I think are really important in helping me to understand the way that economics works. So I guess essentially there are economic phenomena that neoclassical economics tends to ignore. And they're the kind of things that we look to talk about during this lecture series, things that we think are important, that we study, and that we think should be things that we can talk about as a group. You could also argue, as many do, that there are actual flaws in the way that neoclassical economics works, right? So, for example, people often say that it too strongly assumes people to be selfish and rational, when if we look at the work of psychologists or different social scientists, we can see that this is obviously too simple a case to make and that there's too much evidence to suggest otherwise. Basically, it's an important critique to make, I think, as hopefully someone will be doing in our lecture series in Lent term. There's also this tendency to rely on mathematical modelling, which can have its uses for sure, but can also be unrealistic in the way that it abstracts away from a given context. And this is something that other schools of thought are really good at looking at, the way that we have to try and understand specific contexts within which economics happens, the powers at play, the politics of a given region, to understand how the system works. So I think by simply relying too much on mathematical modelling, we neglect the nuances of particular cases, of the way that organisations are structured, of the way that politics is structured in place. And these can actually be very fundamental things in helping us to understand the global economy or the economy of a given time and place. And then more recently as well, neoclassical economics, as I said, has been more associated with free market ideas, right? And again, for me, this is a problem because it really jars with the economic history, as will be talked about in one of our lectures. The sort of ideas of free market don't match up with the way that the rich countries of the world today themselves got rich. And similarly, therefore, these ideas that we in the West have been pronouncing to developing nations through the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank of, privatizing state-owned enterprises, of opening up borders for trade, really hasn't had any effect or any significant effect to help to eradicate poverty. So I think it's important in that sense to recognise these arguable neglects. So then, beyond these sort of failings or maybe flaws in neoclassical economics, I also think that a problem of the hegemony of the school is that it's just good, as Nina and Alicia were saying, to have alternative perspectives on a given thing. It just will help you guys as students, if you're interested, to become more critical, to not take everything that you're given in your various departments at face value, and to sort of, have an awareness that there are these other sort of arguments being made about things that are often taught as if they're some sort of discovered truth. There are a host of incredibly intelligent and hardworking academics in a whole school of other fields, of other schools of thought, and it's an excellent thing to try and engage with these authors in this literature. Because, as I say, the way economics is taught more and more as a pure hard science gets away from the blurry reality of things, and that's something that we try to show as well. And again, in general, the point is that a problem of hegemony is that plurality in the way that we study anything is a good thing. It's a good way to try and approach attaining knowledge, I think. No one school in economics should dominate, because they are all good, in my view, to various extents, at doing different things, and so they all have a purpose. And it's hard to achieve pluralism, because economists, like most people, are stubborn. You have your own sort of way of understanding the world, and it can become dogmatic, because it's very hard to sort of fit all these things together, I think. Neoclassical economics isn't the first to do it, but I think we have to make an effort to try and be more pluralistic. I think it's just a really good way, sort of pedagogically speaking. I also really think that, as Alicia was actually saying, that there should be much more overlap between economics and other social sciences. That's obviously, you can see our lecturers are from a variety of departments, which I think is really great. And it's the idea that economics has to be more humble, it has to accept that there is so much that it can learn, and this works vice versa as well, from the other schools of thought, be it anthropology, the things that can teach us about human nature, sociology, history, politics, psychology, philosophy. I think these are all absolutely essential to helping us understand, and the sharp lines that have been drawn between social sciences are really counterproductive, I think. And that's why we really encourage students from other backgrounds, not just economics, to come to this, because obviously you can see we're not all from the economics faculty ourselves, and there should be some sort of discussion going on. It's always good to have you here. So I'll just then say finally a bit about Paper Zero and the sort of things we're aiming to do. And it's essentially what we're doing with these lecture series, with this paper, is to present economic phenomena from different points of view that we think are missed or considered one-dimensionally in neoclassical economics. And as in sort of addressing the survey results that Nina and Alicia were talking about, this way that economics students wanted to find out more about the real world and to try and help it. And obviously, if that survey was done of other faculties, the results would have been the same. Because, that's why a lot of people, imagine you guys are like it, want to study. It's, you want to try and understand the world around you and to want to try and make it, better, essentially, to be a bit corny. And so that's the kind of thing we try to do. We try to make it more real world, or addressing these sort of theoretical pitfalls in neoclassical economics. So, for example, say in Nina's lecture next week, this time next week, as Alicia was saying, she looks at the way that the American businessmen, right, and think tanks influence the status of neoclassical economics as the way to become the most sort of widely accepted theory. And it's really interesting stuff to understand the actual politics behind that, which is often completely overlooked. And it's a really fascinating story. And again, it's that sort of real world understanding or interpretation of how things happen. And as Alicia said, she'll be talking about in the week after the reproduction of inequality and the way that power at play and people's perceptions of the world around them affects the way that societies and therefore economies are shaped. So inequality, obviously, something exceptionally important, and I imagine it's of interest to a lot of you. And it's just a sort of alternative way of understanding it, and this sort of new way that Alicia's been working on. And then we have, really good things coming along. So Richard Salutin in the history faculty, he's a PhD student as well, of course, is looking as a historian more clearly at the economic history, right? The way that today's rich countries have become rich, and he shows that actually it jars so much with the kind of things that neoclassical economists would advise for countries to develop, and it's a really fascinating lecture. And similarly, Nicholas is, who's a PhD student in economics, he's looking at theories of value, right? And so how we understand, interesting questions like why diamonds become more valuable than water. He looks at the theories of Adam Smith, of David Ricardo, of Karl Marx, showing the way that different people have understandings of value. And it's a very interesting lecture, actually. And then we've got a few more, as you can see, lectures coming up for the rest of the term. And also next term in Lent, we do the whole lecture series again. So we do 8, and we'll have a variety of things going on. Some definite lectures that we'll have are on Keynes and Keynes, post-Keynesianism, these kind of really important ideas that are seriously neglected, in my opinion. Theories of international trade, and also financialization, which is, often I think people find it a bit intimidating, and it's really useful to have a PhD student talk about it. And that's a point that I really do want to stress that I think is great about this, and that Alicia made, is, we are all PhD students, so we're a few years older than you guys at most, and we are just doing sort of very specific things that we care about a lot. And I think that's a really good way for you guys to learn, and as Alicia said, for us to learn as well, to sort of have this conversation where, it's, I think, less intimidating to talk about these things with us than, say, like a lecturer or some older professor, because that's really what we want it to be. We want it to be a place where you can sort of ask questions. As I said, there'll always be time for questions after the lectures, or you can contact us. We're always just going to try and help because that's essentially all that we want to do. So obviously I've been running this course for 1 year with Ida, and it's been going for 4, and I think the students that come along like yourselves really do appreciate it because it's a nice space to get to talk to us and to try and learn about these things, which I hope you agree are really important. So I'm just going to wrap up very briefly by talking a bit of the logistics. So obviously you all found your way here. All the lectures this term will be in this room. They'll change next term, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. And starting with Nina's lecture next week, they're always at this time as well, as you guys know. And the way that we do it is we have the lecturers speak for 40 minutes, and then we have time basically for about 10 minutes of questions. It's always a really nice part of it, actually, in my opinion. And so also, it's not on the website yet, but for each of the lectures, there'll be readings provided by the authors and also an essay question. The readings, as Alicia was saying, they're not mandatory whatsoever. It's just if you think, okay, yeah, that was really cool, I'd like to learn a bit more about it. We've sort of tried to get the sort of best and most accessible text on it for you guys to read if you're interested. And also, we post an essay question, right? So each of the lecturers, and it'll be on our website, choose an essay question. And the idea really is just for it to show you guys the way that these sort of debates are framed. So if a question is a good way to try and understand it. And I mean, if you do want to write an essay on any of them, that's like, it could be of any length of size, of course, but basically it's a huge commitment because you guys are very busy for this year or so. But if you did want to, we'd mark it, we'd go over with you very closely, and it would have to be one of the ones chosen by the lecturers, but I'm sure it would be a very useful experience for you were you to want to. And yes, you do get a diploma if you attend 50% of the lectures. There's no registration, right? It's just, I'll believe you. If you say that you've been to 50%, I trust you. And it's good, we genuinely do this. We give out personalised diplomas at the end, and it's, with good reason, I think, because it is a commitment to come to an extra lecture on your already busy schedules. And, I think you deserve recognition because you're already working very hard. And then...
Welcome to eat as well.
Pardon?
You're welcome to eat.
Yeah, that's true, because it's on your lunch break for many of you, and you might have lectures around development economics, so MPhil is right now, so after this one. But, so you can bring your lunch or whatever. That's what people often do, and well, the gentle sound of a sandwich being eaten is fine. And so there was supposed to be a sign-in sheet going around. Is it done? Okay, good. Well, that's really great, thanks. So if you missed it, please do sign up, just because then we can give you guys just specific emails letting you know about what's going on for the next week's lecture. But yes, okay, that's it. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending.